You are listening to an American Free Press podcast.
Joining me on the line is Greg Felton, the author of The Host and the Parasite. Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Dave.
Greg, we're going to be talking about a meeting that's coming up between President Donald J. Trump and the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. And of course, these guys have been friends for a long time, and a lot of stuff has been happening from UN Resolution number 2334, which was adopted on December 23rd of last year. And we're going to talk about that. Also, Trump has actually criticized the settlement building, the annexation of Palestinian land by the Israelis. He actually criticized that recently, and we're going to be talking about that. But first, for the benefit of the listeners, can you give them a little bit of background about who you are and how you came to write that wonderful book, The Host and the Parasite?
I began writing on the Middle East in the mid-1990s when I was a sub-editor at the Vancouver Courier. I wrote what I thought was an innocuous column about the Rabin assassination, and it turns out that I managed to touch a few interesting nerves, some of them positive, some negative. But as a result of the positive interactions, I became very self-educated in the Middle East, and I've been educated to the point where I find it necessary to write about the criminality of Israel and the misery that's been inflicted upon Palestine and the rest of the Middle East. It also showed me the degree to which the United States is a secondary state to Israel, that how the United States became essentially a governorate, a satrapy of the Zionist empire. It was specifically the September the 11th attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon that told me that journalism was no longer possible for an honest person. And so I began to research Osama bin Laden and the World Trade Center attack. And the more I investigated, the more I realized I had hit, pardon the cliche, the tip of an iceberg. And I had to dive deep underwater to find how this all began. So over 5 years, I wrote the book, The Host and the Parasite, How Israel's Fifth Column Consumed America. And it's been doing fairly well, and I'm glad that people are coming to realize that America has long since lost whatever vestige of independence it once had.
Thanks, Greg, for explaining that. Let's start here. Actually, it was the day after Trump was elected, and that was November 9th of last year. Let me read this here. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Netanyahu had called Trump to congratulate him on his electoral victory earlier in the day. According to the Prime Minister's office, the invitation came during that phone call. Of course, that was the invitation Trump made to Netanyahu to meet with him in the United States at the earliest opportunity. So when are they meeting, Greg?
Meeting on February the 15th. And it's going to be one of those meetings that is probably going to be very, very disturbing for anybody who hopes that Donald Trump will put an end to the abject Zionist sycophancy of all previous administrations.
Okay. Now, let's get into a couple things before we get into the meeting. This Resolution 2334, which was adopted on December 23rd, 2016, it reaffirms relevant resolutions, several of them. It says here, guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, reaffirming the obligation of Israel, the occupying power, to abide scrupulously by its legal obligations and responsibilities under the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war of 12 August 1949. What the United Nations is saying here, first off, is that Israel is violating the Fourth Geneva Convention.
Yeah, that's true, but this is not really news. I mean, it's been violating the Geneva Convention since it started. I mean, the resolution itself is very important. It affirms the legal basis for Palestinians' existence and the essential criminality of Israel. But it doesn't say anything that isn't already well known. What is interesting about it and what makes it important is that the U.S. abstained on it. Had it not done so, it would have legitimized the expansion of Jewish settlements into Palestinian land. And this is what somehow upset Donald Trump. And Trump's upset at this must be understood not as a rational reaction, but as a prejudiced reaction. Because as we know, Donald Trump and the Zionist community go back a long way. His family married into a Jewish family, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is a pro-settlement Zionist. In fact, he is part owner, part financier of a settlement in Israel. So here we have a settlement son-in-law and a president who nominated a settlement zealot to be an ambassador to Israel. What he is going to do is step all over Resolution 2334. He's going to commit gross acts of illegality, and he's going to rationalize it because he is personally friendly with Netanyahu. I don't think there's been a president who has been so sycophantically enamored of an Israeli leader. All previous leaders of America have despised the Zionists for what they do to America, and they go through the ritual of being the subservient governor of the empire, because that's what they have to do to stay in power. But Trump is a little bit different. He is emotionally invested in Israel, and that is frightening for the world.
But in all fairness, just a few days ago, Trump criticized Israeli settlement growth, and he said it was not good for peace.
Yes, he did, but then so has everybody else. Every president in the history of the United States since 1967 has condemned the Zionist expansion to Palestine, and each president has been treated with gross disrespect by Israel. They have been actively ignored, insulted, denigrated, humiliated. And what makes Trump different is that he doesn't care. He is on board with this, and he is the first, I think, pro-settlement president in the history of the country. I mean, Obama, Clinton, W., Reagan, President Bush, they all opposed settlements. At least I think George W. Bush did. But none of them did anything much about it. And the fact that Trump is enthusiastically pro-settlement is of great concern. Now, the fact that he said, well, they're not helpful for peace, that's a cliche. That's probably a safe way for him to appear to be rational, for him to appear to care about Palestinians. I could be dead wrong. He could tell Netanyahu, Benji, you can't do this anymore. You can't put up the settlements. But I have a feeling that's not going to happen. Apparently, Trump's son-in-law Kushner was responsible for bringing Netanyahu to the United States. So instead of a political arrangement between the empire of Israel imposing its will on the United States, we're going to have a sycophantic American government actively enjoying its relationship with Israel. So inasmuch as Hillary Clinton would have started World War III over Syria with Russia, we're going to have Donald Trump isolate the United States ever more because of his refusal to uphold international law and behave like a responsible adult.
I don't think that a lot of people expected Trump to say what he did about the settlements, especially in light of the fact that Trump really goes to the beat of his own drum. He didn't have to say anything because there's no Palestinian lobby that he has to appease. Isn't that true?
That is true. He doesn't have to do that. As far as him saying that, I think probably he was told a few facts by some advisors, and he said that not because he generally meant it, but because he felt it was one of those things he had to say as president. True, there is no Palestinian lobby to speak of in the United States, and Trump does dance to the beat of his own drums. That's a very true statement. He says what he wants, whether he has his brain engaged or not. But the reason he said it is not to be taken too seriously. If he genuinely believed that, he would not have appointed David Friedman to be ambassador to Israel. I don't see Trump really as the same person entirely that ran for office. There seems to be some co-optation of Trump by the deep state neocon warmongers that would have been happy to see Hillary Clinton elected. So I have to wait and see what happens after this meeting. If it goes the way I think it will, it'll be a disaster for the world. And speaking of settlements, Israel has passed a law that has legalized theft of Arab land under the cover of law. It can steal any land it wants and say, hey, the law says we can do it. I haven't seen Trump say anything about this.
It looks like this crazy Netanyahu is under some pressure here. I'm looking at an article from the Times of Israel, actually just today, February 12th. Days before his first meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump this week in Washington, Netanyahu is facing warnings from within his right-wing coalition of an earthquake if he doesn't publicly disavow his previous support of a two-state solution. Writing on Facebook Saturday night, Education Minister Naftali Bennett, who chairs the Jewish Home Party, said Wednesday's meeting with Trump will be the test of Netanyahu's life and will determine Israel's policy toward the Palestinians for years to come. What's going on there? Why are they threatening Netanyahu? And what is he going to do about it?
Well, one of the sad things of Israel is that the original Israelis, if you can call them that, behind the 1967 boundaries, are now a minority in the Knesset. All power really rests with the rabid, psychopathic East European settler community. And Bennett is part of that community. They want to commit mass murder. They want a Nazi Holocaust against Palestine. Now, of course, the Jewish Holocaust in history is grossly exaggerated and, in fact, misrepresented. What would happen in Palestine would be right before our eyes and undeniable. According to the settler mentality, any respect, any acknowledgement of Palestine, even respect for Palestinian life, is considered a blasphemy against their pseudo-religion. And so we have the settlers threatening, bizarrely, probably the most neo-fascist prime minister in history, to be even more cruel to Palestine. See, the fact that Palestinian two-state solution exists as a rhetorical position means that the settlers cannot commit wholesale land clearing and murder, and Bennett wants the right to commit mass murder. So we have the ghost of Hitler living within the Zionist community in Israel, the rabid, psychopathic, right-wing settler community taking over the government in such a way that it is blackmailing the prime minister. Now, whether Netanyahu does this or not, I don't know. He has to give some illusion that he is interested in peace. If he doesn't, then Israel has committed the last stage before genocide, wholesale active genocide. So someone like Bennett, who is really one of the worst people in the government, he and Avigdor Lieberman, they're the ones who are trying to tell Netanyahu what to do. The settlers think they run the government. They think that the government has no obligation but to serve their interests. And I would think that Netanyahu wouldn't disavow it because that would make him out to be a liar. If he's just stated support for the two-state solution, however vacuous that may be, then he has to admit that everything Israel has ever done has been a lie. And that will do more to give support to Palestine. Are Americans going to stand by and watch a wholesale slaughter of civilians take place? Well, if the media doesn't report it, probably. I don't know what will happen. I mean, Netanyahu can either take dictation from the settlers or he can speak his own mind.
Greg, as always, it's wonderful hearing your analysis of these matters, and I hope that we can speak again after these two leaders meet.
I hope so, too. Hope there's going to be a world around in 5 years because of these two leaders.
Certainly that's a concern. Greg Felton, the author of The Host and the Parasite, How Israel's Fifth Column Consumed America. Greg, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Dave.